The Spinoff Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests including rugby player, father and role model TJ Perenara.
My family bring me joy. Rugby brings me joy too, but it's not the same joy as my family brings me.
And global dancer and choreographer Kirsten Dodgen.
For some reason, people think I'm very intimidating.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBank.
When you're sort of very head down in the weeds of something, it's good to remind yourself as a journalist that most people's lives are focused on other things.
Talofa lava, I'm Madeleine Chapman, editor of The Spinoff. Welcome to Behind the Story, where I go behind the scenes of a big article on the Spinoff from the week. If you want a weekly rundown of some of the best reads from the Spinoff every Saturday, make sure you sign up to the weekend newsletter. Today I'm talking to Spinoff Deputy Editor Alice Neville. Alice has been with the Spinoff since 2018, originally hired as the food editor. Within our small team, she oversees any news coverage we run, particularly around politics and social issues. I wanted to speak to Alice today as this week was a big week of news on the Spinoff, with the release of the final report from the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care. It was breaking news, but also something that we knew was coming, which is a very particular type of challenge for a small team without any dedicated news reporters. And Alice was leading from the front. Here's Alice Neville on Behind the Story. Kia ora, Alice. Thank you for being here.
Kia ora, Mad. Thanks for having me.
You are one of the longest-serving writers and editors at the Spinoff now. You've got 6 years under your belt. You're also now the deputy editor, with the fine print being that you oversee the news arm of the Spinoff. How does news work at a site that is probably more known as a current affairs and pop culture site?
Yes, so we don't, because we're sort of small and nimble, you might say, we don't have to cover everything. We don't do straight reporting usually in the way that a bigger site such as the Herald or Stuff would do. So what we cover is things that have national significance. It's not usually crime unless there's sort of a wider trend involved. It's often politics or social issues. But it's sort of news can be anything that's happening in New Zealand or the world right now. And the way we cover it is often explainer-style journalism, which is sort of breaking down what's happening for our readers in a very readable way. Opinion pieces. And what am I forgetting?
Well, I think probably feature writing, which...
Yes, of course, yes.
Which you said we don't cover news in the same way that other bigger places cover. And I think even though sometimes the topics are the same, it's the approach, which is like, I don't think we would ever publish a headline that says, insert quote, blah, 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 minister says. You know, it's not, there's not these kind of rolling updates of comments from people. It's more wrapped around a bigger story.
Yes, so we sort of have the luxury, I guess, of being able to go a bit more in depth because we don't have to jump on everything straight away. So that's why we, you know, like to do those bigger, chunkier features. Or if we do want to do something fast turnaround, we'll try to go at it from a slightly different angle than just a straight news report.
which then makes it almost a little bit ironic that we don't jump on everything, but when there is big breaking news of national significance, we do sort of become a breaking news website all of a sudden, which the bar is quite high, and we do have a breaking news protocol.
We do. There's a big button that we push and the siren goes off. That's not true, but we do have breaking news protocol, which someone will decide. You, Amber?
I tend to decide in the first instance, yes.
Where basically you flick a hypothetical switch and say, right, breaking news protocol, and everyone knows what that means because there's a lovely Google Doc that explains what that means. It basically means that our writers and editors stop what they're working on usually, and everyone jumps in to help cover the breaking news. And as you said, it's a high bar, so things like the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle, the resignation of Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister. When else? Did we go into it for that shooting at Commercial Bay briefly? I mean, we can go into it and then don't have to stay in it all day.
Yeah, it basically is because we realise that when you have nobody whose day-to-day job is keeping an eye on the news and reporting those updates, suddenly when there is big news, it does just mean everybody has to drop everything. And so it does become literally that everybody's job becomes a different job, essentially. Someone who usually writes about, pop culture will suddenly be on looking at coverage and looking for angles around the media and portrayal and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because we don't do it very often. Yeah. And yet it's actually something that we're maybe a little bit known for in terms of being quite fast on those breaking news pieces, probably because we're small enough that we do just press that big red button in the office and suddenly everyone knows exactly what to do.
Yeah. And I think we started doing that kind of thing around COVID, which is when we first sort of really got into covering news and became quite known for being good at it.
This week, though, was not a breaking news protocol because a breaking news protocol is only when you don't know that something's going to happen. You basically, something has just suddenly happened and now everyone needs to respond. This week there was certainly large national breaking news, but it wasn't sudden. Yeah. Can you sort of explain the different process around knowing when big news is coming that we have to cover as a small team?
Yeah, so you are talking about the release of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care's final report, which has been, the inquiry's been going on for 6 years, actually similar to the length of time I've worked at the Spinoff, funnily enough.
Wow.
And it kept being delayed and delayed and delayed and pushed back, but a month ago, the final report was given to government ministers, and it was announced, I think, about a month ago that it would be tabled in Parliament and made public on July 24, which was yesterday.
We are recording this on Thursday, yes.
Yes, at 4 p.m. And what often happens with things like that is media will get an embargoed copy. And often that can be, if it's a sort of a government announcement, there might be a couple of smaller documents that might be a few hours before the embargo. But in this instance, it was a 3,000-page report in 16 volumes, which weighed 14 kilograms if you're interested. So thankfully, the government decided that media could have that 2 days in advance under embargo. So we knew that was coming on Monday afternoon, and we'd have a couple of days to delve into it and prepare what we were going to publish at 4 o'clock when that embargo lifted. So it was breaking news for the New Zealand public, but we had sort of 2 days to prepare, which is obviously quite different to when something just happens and you are jumping on it. So, yeah, it's kind of was 2 days of everyone head down, most of our staff writers and editors, and it wasn't sort of stressful, frantic vibe that breaking news is. It was pretty full on and intense.
And we had a few pieces. I would say we've published maybe half a dozen or so pieces since 4 p.m. yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably that's quite a large number for the size of our team.
Yeah.
And probably comparatively with other media, but it's still 3,000 pages long. So how, when you're thinking about news and the fact that the Spinoff writers can't write 50 articles in 2 days, and you need to make a decision about what are the key things that we need to be getting across, because our readers are also not going to read 50 articles in 2 days. How do you sort of work that out in terms of which pieces to commission and which ones you kind of have to maybe hope that other outlets cover?
Yeah, that's a sort of an interesting balancing act, I guess. And with the report, because we had done our 250,000 series, which was a series of features from the perspective of survivors of abuse and care that we ran, when was that, a couple of years ago?
Started in 2022 and ended at the end of last year.
Because we'd done that, we knew that we wanted to focus on the report quite significantly, and because we knew how important it was. So and full credit to Mad and full disclosure, I was on holiday in Fiji last week, so quite a lot of planning fell to you, Mad, last week. But of course we knew we needed to centre survivors' voices. So we had Steve Goodless lined up to write something about the report. And we discussed amongst ourselves once we had the report on Monday, and, we threw around some ideas. I think we talked about doing by the numbers initially, but, once we had the report and different things came out, we kind of thought, actually, we don't have enough hands to do that. That's something other media will probably do.
I don't think they did.
But actually, I don't think we did.
I don't think anyone's done by the numbers.
Maybe we should have done by the numbers. Maybe we still could. But so we knew there would be a lot of recommendations and that they would be quite complex. So that was, from the outset, definitely something we were going to do, try to distill and explain all the recommendations, which was our new staff writer, Lyric Waiwiri-Smith's job. And I sort of delved in to do a lot of background research, because the first recommendation in the final report was the government should implement without delay the 95 previous recommendations of the 2021 redress report.
As a real wish for more wishes kind of situation immediately.
As soon as I saw that, and then there were 137 other recommendations, I was like, oh my God. But I think we did a good job of distilling the most important ones down, and explaining things like what that redress scheme should look like. And, there's a lot of complex stuff to get our heads around and then figure out how to explain to readers, like all the suggested reforms of legislation around civil claims and sentencing guidelines.
We learn a lot of legal terms and principles.
We do.
And trying to make sure that we don't get anything wrong in explaining this stuff.
Yeah, and it's just a question of, I quite like doing that kind of thing, trying to take, because I like brevity and I get annoyed by overly long things. I like taking something that's sort of in an academic or legal tone and explaining it. So a lot of those recommendations had about 1 million words in when they could be distilled into, a quarter of as many. So, so that was, Lyric was on the recommendations with help from me. And then when we had the report, other things came up that we thought would be a good idea, such as Joel, because one of the early recommendations was for a lot of people to make apologies. And also there was just a long list of people who are at fault for sort of allowing the conditions under which the abuse happened. So Joel had the very good idea of getting all the names of those people, because the report said things like every Minister of Health from 1950 to 1999, every Minister of blah, 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 every head of this organisation and public service commissioner and yada, yada. So Joel got 136 names, I think. Was it? Something like that?
I think it might have been 112.
That sounds about right. So that was quite a good spin-off-y way to cover it as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that often those topics that are the most important are also the ones that it's the hardest to get people to read about, because the reason they're so important is because they're so confronting, and that's also people don't necessarily love to be confronted on a daily basis. So there is always a balance of trying to get across the gravity of the situation, but also in a way that people will actually read it, and so then trying to make it a little bit, quote unquote, in a format, or, just a big list or by the numbers, or which can sometimes on the surface feel kind of a little bit glib, but ultimately the people do seem to be more willing to engage with things like that feel, using everyday language and not kind of throwing in all the legal terms just for the sake of it.
Yeah, and when you're sort of very head down in the weeds of something, it's good to remind yourself as a journalist that most people's lives are focused on other things, and, not everyone even realises that this report is coming out at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. So, in fact, most people probably didn't realise that this was happening.
No, I don't think so.
So, it's good to remind ourselves that while we were keen to get a lot of stuff out at 4 p.m. on the dot when the embargo lifted, for most people it was more maybe get home from work or read it in the bulletin the next morning kind of thing. So that's why we've had a few more pieces coming today, and we no doubt will continue to cover it.
I just wanted to talk about one thing, because I can't not mention it while talking to you, which is subbing. So we use Slack at the Spinoff, and we have a Slack channel called Notes, which is for any notes around style, or if there's some typo in an article, someone might point it out, or more likely it will be Alice gently explaining the difference between two similar sounding words, or how to spell a word correctly, or please stop using this format because it's actually grammatically incorrect. You have had a lot of experience both as a copy editor and a sub and a features editor and all sorts of editing, and you by far have the closest eye in terms of editing word by word at the Spinoff.
Yeah.
Subs are also often the first people that are made redundant when in big newsrooms, and you can almost tell immediately. Would you like to make a little pitch for the value of sub-editors in journalism and media?
Yeah, poor old subs have been a bit maligned and lost their jobs a lot over the years. In a way, I understand, because really more people in terms of writers and senior editors should actually be better at just getting stuff right. But I don't know. I just think in terms of credibility and readability, actually making our stories good and interesting and nice to read, that's, the importance of of a sub or of a well-edited piece. And every writer, even the world's best writers, will benefit from some editing, which every good writer would admit. So, yeah, as I like to remind people when I'm nagging them in the notes channel, they're not just style points for the sake of having rules. You know, they actually make your story better and more readable. That's my little lecture for today.
And on that note, I want to say thank you, Alice, for coming on Behind the Story. You can read all of our coverage of the Abuse and Care final report, plus everything else we write on thespinoff.co.nz. That was Deputy Editor Alice Neville on Behind the Story. I'll be back next week with another Spinoff writer and another Spinoff yarn. Thanks for listening.
Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire, here to urge you to tune in to Gone by Lunchtime, a podcast with me, Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, tackling the world of New Zealand politics, from policy to polling, from scandal to psychodrama. Listen to Gone by Lunchtime, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network, wherever good pods are sold.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.